Today we're gonna be making one easy dough and one expert dough. Hi everyone, I am Vincenzo from NEA in Amsterdam, and in this series I'm going to teach you how to make pizza in your big green egg. 500 grams of 00 flour, 100 grams of wholemeal flour, 15 grams of salt, and 3 grams of fresh yeast. So we have our 00 flour, and we're going to combine it with the wholemeal flour, so to create a little bit more richness. So we're gonna mix this flour together. We're gonna stir a little bit to make sure that, you know, the flours are mixed nicely together. And we are going to crumble our yeast inside. We can dilute in the water or just crumble it inside. I mean, however is going to be in our dough. And we are starting with pouring like majority of the water. And in this phase, what we're gonna do is we're not going to get our hands dirty immediately, but we're gonna use a wooden stick, because in this way, we're going to form an homogenic mass without getting too messy. We will start to pour our 420 grams of water. Let's say that we're going to put like a good 80% of it. And we stop, and we're going to start to stir so that we can obtain in a couple of minutes only one shape out of this. It's going to crumble a little bit. That's a sign that we need a little bit more water, and we keep mixing. The best is to rotate the bowl while you rotate and use the wooden spoon. Basically, what we are doing, we are emulating what a dough machine does. At this point, it will be a little bit sticky, but we're going to try to make something that it's very easy to manage for everyone. We still have the salt to include in this recipe, of course, but that's not time yet. We first want to get this to be one shape. As you can see, the dough, it's already forming. We are at a stage that we almost need to work it with our hands. But it's better that we started this way, because otherwise it would have been a little bit too sticky from the beginning. When the dough looks like this, one shape, it's time to put it out. So this is the time that we need to knead the dough on the bench. And we still need to include the salt, so we don't have to forget about that. We always add the salt towards the end of the dough, also because the salt absorbs water. So we don't want the salt to absorb the water that the yeast needs to absorb. So we don't mix them together, only for that reason. And we keep kneading the dough. Now it's still very moist, and when we're going to add salt, it's going to get a little bit more structure, because salt will make it tiny bit firmer. So we're going to open up a little bit like this. We're going to add the salt. We're gonna add a tiny splash of water that I kept from the water that we had. So, okay, just to help out the salt to be integrated in the dough. And we're going to fold and keep kneading. The dough at this point might break a little bit because the salt, but we're going to go over it, and we're going to succeed in making an homogenic shape. Talking about flours, I was talking about the 00 flour. So we have different classification of flours. We have 0, 00, type 1, type 2, wholemeal. So all these definitions are just the description of how refined these flours are in the mill. So basically the 00, it's a more refined flour than the type 1, and the type 1 is more refined than type 2. There it goes. We keep kneading for about 10 minutes until the salt is dissolved. We don't have to feel the salt under our touch. And at the moment, I don't feel it anymore, so it means that the salt is absorbed. So what we're going to do now is a stop. We're gonna have a rest in the bowl again, covered, and this will allow the gluten to form without us stressing it. So our dough has rested for 10-15 minutes. So as you can see, the dough is already more expandable than before, and we're going to keep kneading, but this time you will see that it gets smoother and smoother as we talk. And we keep kneading for another 3 to 4 minutes, but this is almost a dough ready to sleep for the day or for 8 hours. After a few minutes of kneading, we will see that the dough will become less and less sticky. Okay, so when we see that our dough is smooth and not sticking anymore, it's ready to proof, and we're going to put it back in the bowl. Most important, cover with film and rest for 8 hours at room temperature, which means we want temperature in between 22 and 25 degrees maximum. Right, so let's see how to make a more expert dough. We have the same flour, 500 grams of 00 flour, 100 grams of wholemeal flour, 2 grams of yeast, and 300 grams of water. So in total, we're going to hydrate this mass for the 50% of it. So it's 600 grams of total flour and 300 grams of water. We're going to combine the flour just as before. This time we're going to crumble the yeast very small. So we're going to put water now, and we can actually do it all at once. At this time we don't have to form any dough. We just want to mix flour and water together. This is the time to get a little bit dirty with your hands, but we're going to do this. We don't need to make any movement to create or to have something that resembles the dough. So at this time, at this point, we are creating something that it's very crumbly, while before we were creating something very smooth and homogenic to make the dough. This time we want to create something rough. We don't want to activate all the processes that a dough has. Not yet. So after we reach this stage, which basically shows that there is no dry flour anymore in the bowl, and we just have to make sure that we are not trying to create the dough. So whenever this crumble, they want to form and they start to like become a dough, we need to stop. We need to stop because we are not forming the gluten yet. After we reach this stage, we want to store the biga in a container, and we want to fill up only 1/3 of its capacity in order to let it breathe through the night or through the hours. We want to put the container for 3 hours at our room temperature, which we define in between 22 and 25 degrees. And after that, we are going to go to the fridge for 10 to 14 hours. After 3 hours at room temperature and 12 hours in the fridge, our biga, which we kept covered, of course, looks more like a dough, but it's not formed yet. And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to break it, basically, and put it in our dough mixer. I suggest to handle this dough with a dough mixer and not by hand, like the easy dough. It's very difficult to knead it by hand. And we'll keep breaking to prevent the forming of one mass immediately. So we want to distribute equally in the bowl. Then we have basically our remaining water. I want to remind you that we used 300 grams of water for 600 grams of flour. Our total recipe is 420 grams of water, which means that we have 120 left here, which we're going to include in this dough. So we put all the pre-ferment, that's how we call it. It's a pre-ferment, this biga, in the machine. Together with, we still have the salt, 15 grams of salt, and the water. We're going to add up a little yeast, depending on the day. If it's a cold day, we might put like a gram more, but let's stay in the parameters of 1 or 2 grams per kilo of flour in total. So we're gonna add some yeast just to give a starter, a push. We're going to add up a little splash of the water to start the machine. And we can always keep some dusting flour here, and this will help the machine to grab the dough in a little bit easier way. So this is just like a trick, not really in the recipe. And we're going to start our machine at like low, medium speed. Adding a little bit of the water. I'm gonna dust a little bit, as I said, and it's definitely helping this machine. We don't exaggerate, otherwise we go out of the recipe. So we are going to knead for about 10 minutes, just to give enough time to the gluten to form. And we keep adding water very gradually. We don't run the risk to have too much water in the vessel of the machine and we just do things as gradually as possible. And we don't have to forget that towards 2-3 minutes before the end of the dough, we're going to add the salt. And we want to always keep a little bit of water to help the salt to dissolve in the dough. So our dough is looking nice. It's already forming some beautiful structure. And we're gonna go with more water, of course. And we higher the speed a little bit. After 6-8 minutes of kneading, it's time to add the salt, and we do it by adding a splash of water before, and salt will also help us to clean the machine, the side of the machine, with this scrubbing action. Okay, salt is in, and now it's just time of finishing all the water that we have from the recipe, and that's where we will know that the dough is ready. So after we added the salt, we can see that the machine has been working on the dough, and the bowl is absolutely clean. So that's a good sign. It means that all the water is trapped in the dough, and the gluten is strong enough to trap this water in. So our dough is ready. We're going to stop, and we can see that it's just hanging on the tool without sticking on it. So that's a very good sign. So our dough is ready, and as you can see, the bowl is very clean, and the dough is formed and ready to proof and be portioned for the ultimate baking. So after the dough is being rested, we have it here. We put it on the bench, and we start to portion in 250 grams per dough ball, because we made 1 kilo of dough in total. We start cutting. We do 250 grams, our dough balls. So we have our 4 dough balls, our 4 pizza, and what we need to try to do now, doesn't matter if this is the pro dough or the easy dough, the way to portion is exactly the same. 1 kilo of dough, we made 4 dough balls, 4 pizzas that we are going to fold, and I'm going to show you how. We have different techniques. You can use just the workbench and the spatula, and with this movement you try to rotate and pull the dough balls towards you, trying to push towards the bottom so that there is no air or no knot, as we say, and it's closed properly. And we're going to place in a container for the final proofing before the baking. And specifically, we're going to place them in this sort of geometry so that they will push each other, and we will know the moment that they're ready when they will actually be closer to each other and they will just move up a little bit. So now that you know how to make the perfect pizza dough, tune in next week to make the best recipes for your pizza sauces. And don't forget to check the video description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.